Hi, in this video, I'm excited to introduce you to the features of Trifecta, our all-new polyrhythmic, polymetric, polycyclic, generative performance sequencer, arpeggiator, multi-timbral output powerhouse. It's a very creative device that can be used in a multitude of ways. To install Trifecta, open the zip that's downloaded and drag the .amxd file to your user library, presets, MIDI effects, Max MIDI effect subfolder. I've already got mine added to my generative custom collection here, and if I search for it, there we go. Now Trifecta, being a MIDI effect, processes MIDI before an instrument translates that MIDI into sound, and therefore must be placed prior to instruments on any MIDI track in your set. So let's begin with a bit of an exploration of the overall graphical user interface. For those of you familiar with other Manifest Audio devices, hopefully the visual language will indicate a few things to you. So first of all, on the left of the device, we have our input settings. This toggles all three lanes for transposition input on or off. We'll look at the features of that later on. You'll notice below that the selection menu to allow Trifecta to play freely, to only play while incoming MIDI notes are held in gate mode, to only play between those incoming notes in side mode, or to be used as an arpeggiator, which only plays while being held, resets every time new notes are played, and also by default transposes all of the notes. So we'll get into that mode soon enough. We can also toggle out of solo mode to blend the incoming MIDI notes along with Trifecta's output. Here we have our global clock settings. We can pause and play Trifecta's primary internal clock. We can slow down, so this is a multiplier, or accelerate by dividing the global clock. This slider applies the offset delay timing globally for all tracks. So if you want to globally reduce or increase the global offset timing, you can do that here. It's a great way to quickly turn that off at 0% if you need to. And finally, in the bottom right, this resynchronization will, at the beginning of the next bar, resynchronize all polycyclic parameter loops that are currently running. So that's our input and clock settings. On the right, we have our output settings as sustain, delay, hold. This governs whether notes are output polyphonically or a variety of monophonic modes, which allows the legato input to become relevant. We'll leave it on poly for now. Here we have the toggle to enter drums mode, and you'll notice when I toggle it, these MIDI note pitches will instantaneously switch to some MIDI notes that are a little more relevant for drum rack pad editing simultaneously. The scale is set to local when I toggle into drums mode, and the localized scale is set to chromatic, which is what you'll probably want if you're working with drums. But exiting drums mode switches back to a global scale. Whichever one was there is retained, and whatever your previous note selections were are returned to in the lane note pitches. So we'll get into those momentarily. Here we have our global key and scale, which we can also change up here in Live 12 or higher. And you'll notice as I change the key and scale here, that change is reflected. In Trifecta, we have a octave transposition and our semitone transposition, both of which will remain conformed to the selected key and scale. And finally, we have a global output delay. So we select a base rate for that delay and then a multiplier. Time 0, there will be no delay. That multiplier then gets divided. So 0 divided by 1 is still 0. But if I do 6 divided by 2, that's going to be a 3/16th note delay plus an optional millisecond delay, which can be added even when this is at 0. So a very flexible output delay timing. And we can hide and show our note output viewer here. Okay, so that's the output settings in a nutshell. Along the top, we have our global settings. So before we get into that, perhaps it makes sense to discuss what we're looking at central to the device here. So we have 3 MIDI strands, and they're called strands because they can be woven together in a variety of ways. And so each strand can be toggled off and on, sent to the track's MIDI output or one of up to 64 relay destinations via the included X relay utility included with Utility Boost. We can transpose with incoming MIDI a specific strand, right? So I mentioned here this enables transposition for all 3, but we can say, hey, only let strand 2 be transposed with incoming MIDI, for example. Now, each strand is comprised of 2 MIDI pitches, which, with the default edit mode of choice, allows us to determine the probability that we will play either the higher top setting at higher values or down here minimized, the lower setting, or somewhere in between. So it's a probabilistic choice between whichever pitches we specify here, and we can enable these for MIDI learning input. So if I enable L1 and I make sure that we have track 2 MIDI armed, and then I play a note via my push, then we see that change here in real time. And we can use that performatively to change either one or the other, right? You can't change them both at the same time because then they would both be the same note, but one at a time per strand in most cases. And so this allows you to performatively adapt your note choices, which can yield some really fascinating results. Okay, so now we get into the timing and clock settings here per lane. So we have a divisor. This is how many divisions or steps we can edit. And as I increase the number, new blank steps are added. So I need to manually enable these and enable the gate, which is always here on the bottom. Okay, so now just strand 1 is 19 steps long, and this is the multiplier of how many bars those 19 steps will be divided between. So at 1 bar, we're dealing with 19th notes. If I set this to 2 bars, then we get, I guess, that would be 9.5 notes. That doesn't really make sense, but what I'm trying to say is that these 19 divisions are now divided across 2 bars or 3 bars. And so both the divisor and the multiplier can be set between, 1 and 64 in the case of the multiplier, and 2 and 64 in the case of the divisor. But as you can see here, setting it down to a minimum and then bringing it back up will remove some of your steps that you created, so there's no memory retained there. So just be careful when you shorten and then increase it. Be advised you may lose some step data, but if you're increasing it, you're just creating new steps that are yet to be filled. So each of these can be set on a per strand basis. Okay, so multipliers are set on a per strand basis, but the divisor can be set for all strands simultaneously. Also, you'll notice this number got reduced, having been brought down by the divisor. That's because this is the loop length of each strand, and the loop length cannot exceed the number of divisors. So we can have a loop any number of steps less than this number. And I'll just double click to reset those. And above that, we have our reset in bars, so that if I have like, a 13 division thing with like only 9-step loop, that can be very difficult to predict the polycyclic, polymetric, polyrhythmic results. So maybe we want to reset it in bars. And that's what this number here is for. And this sets that globally for all strands together. So you can turn whatever crazy pattern is emanating from the rhythmic settings of each strand, the loop length, the divisor, the multiplier, and reset those together or independently. This one could reset every 2 bars, this one every 5 bars, and this one 4 bars. But if we want it all to be a 4-bar loop, sort of, or present as one, really, we can reset it globally here. Okay, and again, for those familiar with our visual language, you may recognize our forward, backward, and elliptical direction, plus a random step for the current parameter lane that we're viewing. And this can also be resynced, and these can be set globally as well for all 3 strands simultaneously. Now, the current strand can be randomized by this amount. So if I click the dice, it's going to randomize this current parameter for this strand, the choice parameter, by this amount. We can set the randomization amount globally for all strands simultaneously here and randomize them all together simultaneously like this, so long as lanes is selected. And before I get to the other global randomization mode, I'll just demonstrate that we can globally set all steps of a particular selected parameter lane of a given strand to a value defined here and reset it with its own reset button. So that goes for all of these here. Okay, now we can randomize not just the lanes, but the timings. So if I randomize the timings, now we've got all these different patterns appearing, which must be populated with steps. So then maybe we want to go back to our lanes and randomize those parameters. Okay, so finally, we've got one of my favorite features here, which is the play modes. We've got 4 different weave modes to select from. So by default is combine. The 3 strands will be combined into one single polyphonic output. We can converse automatically between them, which you'll see in context later, whereby hierarchically the playback is determined. So strand 3 only plays when strand 2 and 1 are not playing, and strand 2 only plays when strand 1 is not playing. And strand 1 just does its own thing. We can also count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 between them, forward, backwards, or forward and backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, at a division of bars specified here. This also specifies the interval at which lane parameter shuffling will occur if I toggle this on. Finally, we also have a chaos mode whereby rather than counting between them, we randomize which strand is playing at a given time. By default, in this mode, it will always randomize from one strand to another, or toggle this to add a chance that there will be a rest between the strands. Okay, so I've explained everything without any audible examples. Probably it's time to take a listen. So let's just go in detail on one strand. I think I will toggle the others off. And if you hold down the Shift key, this becomes a solo button. So that's pretty nifty. Now strand 1 is audible. It's going to the output here. I'm just going to reset everything and set it to the default length of 16. And actually, I'll reset again now that we're at 16 steps. So we're going to hear 16 steps of C4. And so we're going to hear 16 steps of C4, but it's only looping 7, and it's going to repeat that every 4 bars. So let me reset those. So you can see that this is only looping those 7 steps. I'll just double click this to set it to 16. And now I think a good thing to do would be to set this to 50% chance between C4 and C1. And as I increase the division, we're not hearing these new steps, we're hearing the acceleration, but the loop is left at 16, so we need to increase that to hear those new steps. And we're just getting a sine wave from operator here, nothing too exciting, we'll get into that later. Okay, now where it gets really fun is that each of the 7 editing lanes, gate, choice, velocity, chance, length, delay, and control change, get their own parameter values here. So let's just go back and set this to 16 steps. It'll be a little easier to hear what's going on. But so each of these parameter lanes gets their own unique controls here, and choice happens to get a Euclidean setting. So if I increase the number of steps here, then we get a 17th Euclidean step, and I'm just going to re-enable the gate, and I can set how many of those Euclidean steps are filled. And with this being the choice pattern, not the gate, it's imposing a Euclidean pattern on which of these 2 notes plays, right? Okay, and with the gate enabled for all of them, they all play. So I've just imposed a little step in the gate pattern, which is still set to a lower loop rate. If I go back to the gate, there we go, it's at 7. So let's put that to 16 as well. Okay. Nice. And so now if I set this top one to listen to MIDI input, so I can sort of play the note that's coming in. So you can create these really dynamic, performative, melodic patterns in such a way, whether you go crazy with the, polyrhythms and all that is your call now. I can also switch to controlling the lower pitch and then back to the other. Okay, but I can also enable transposition mode just for this strand individually here. Okay, but we haven't even explored all of the Euclidean options for the choice mode. Gate also has the same Euclidean options, so we can rotate the pattern here. We can change the direction of the pattern here, forward or backward, which works along with the rotation. You'll see an inverse of the pattern. And speaking of pattern inverse, we can flip it. So this is your invert toggle. And again, this is the same visual language you may recognize from our other devices. Okay, so that goes for the choice, the note choice parameter of all lanes, Euclidified. Isn't that fun? Okay, so the gate also has a Euclidean option, which got shortened to 2 at some point. So now this gate pattern is imposed over top of which notes are playing in particular. So now I've got this same 16 bar loop, and I can just say, hey, actually, let's just loop 14 of these gate steps. And as I switch back to choice, we'll see that Euclidean pattern imposed on the gate, and we'll see the playhead indicator looping back on itself a little bit differently here. Okay, so we've got Euclidean options for choice and gate. Let's go to the velocity. So now the velocity, we can, let's do a 3-step loop here. So now it's going through those 3 steps, and just so we can hear it, I've got the velocity affecting the modulator B level in operator so we can really hear it. And now what we have here is simply a floor and a ceiling. So I can say, hey, narrow these to a higher range. It's pushing all those values up, or move the ceiling down. So now the maximum is 54 rather than 127. Okay, so that's the velocity settings. And we can, of course, with the learn enabled, play a MIDI pattern in. With learn disabled, we can automate or modulate the note parameters. And of course, the indicator shows which of the two notes is playing there. Okay, chance. This is the probability that any of these will ever play. So let's do a 6-bar pattern on the chance of increasing likelihood. Earlier in the cycle, they're less likely to play. And again, we can set a ceiling and raise the floor. So maybe I don't want the minimum to be 0%. Maybe the minimum is a 25% of playing. Maybe I don't ever want it to be 100%. I can type in 90% as my maximum chance for that lane. I could also randomize those values here. Heard you like a little chance in your chance. So let's go now to the length. If you wanted a note tie, okay, you can impose it there. So let's go back here and impose some glide and make sure it's set to one voice. So now we've got a tie there. We can also randomize. Let's go 100% randomization. And again, we could set the ceiling to never be longer than the note division. So at 100%, the maximum value will never be longer than a single, in this case, 16th division of the bar. We can also raise the floor so it's never lower than 10%. And as a matter of fact, we can invert these to reverse their behavior. So now the previously longer steps are shorter, and vice versa. So the delay allows us to impose some swing timing by this amount, and we can control that again globally here. So there's no swing. And in swing mode, only every second note will actually have this offset delay amount applied. Again, it's multiplied by this amount. If I set it to 100%, it's going to be very swung, and we can reduce it down here. Now, I can add other swings, completely different swing times to these other lanes, but if I want to copy this swing pattern, this per step offset delay pattern to the others, I can click this C button, and you'll see they've both received that pattern now. Pretty cool, I think. Now, if I want to go completely crazy, I can toggle from swing to slop mode. And slop mode means that all of the steps are now being delayed by this pattern here, not just the interstitial ones that provide the swing timing. So we've got a very sloppy sounding pattern. Difficult to hear now without any other context behind it, but there we go. And finally, we have a control change pattern. So we can set the control change number here. We can toggle whether or not it's outputting control change values, and we can set the MIDI channel here. But that's a little more advanced. Okay, so now that I've got this pattern here, it's probably good to quickly show the difference between the lane reset, which resets all the lane values, or the global reset. So if I change the multiplier and reset settings, the reset only resets the parameters. If I do the global reset, it's going to reset all the parameters, and it's going to set all the timings back to a multiplier of 1, a reset of 0, and the maximum loop length the divisor will allow. So at a division of 21, we got a loop length of 21. But let's go back to a 16 division, and let's go ahead and get our little Euclidean pattern going here. Back to the gate. We can now get everything reset except for, again, the division. So if I have an odd division of 18 and I hit this global clear, it's going to set everything except that division of 18 to their default, which in the case of the parameter lane loop length happens to be the maximum of whatever the division is, not an arbitrary 16, even though that's the starting point. Okay, so getting a little lost in the weeds of the technicalities here, I think it's time to play around with something a little more fun. Let's go ahead and Euclidify the gate pattern here. And so it's important to note the gate is always available as a reference down here. We can turn them on by dragging up or off by dragging down. But if we want to access the Euclidean parameters of the gate control, then we need to select the gate lane, and that's where they appear, the fills, the offset, the direction, and the inversion controls. Okay, so yeah, let me go back to our combine mode, and nice. Let's go to the choice and make sure those are bouncing around, and we have some chants, right, that had been reset. Okay, right, we're saying some sort of cycle like that, which we're going to set to 6. And the velocity here, it's going to be that little 3 cycle loop. Okay, now adding this second lane, it's getting merged, it's getting combined. And so now it's not so interesting. Let's go and start editing the choices for that lane. We're getting some nice chords happening here. Okay. Okay, and now again, we're getting some interplay between these 3 different channels. I think it might be good to get a little more interesting with the gate situation here. And I'm going to leave this bottom one mostly playing because I want to show you the converse mode, in which, again, the bottom one, strand 3, only plays when strand 2 and strand 1 are muted. So actually, let me fill these even less. Okay, so let's go and converse them. Okay, and if I want a reference for which ones are playing, we can open the viewer, and they are coded with the same colors as the others. I'm going to move this up an octave just to differentiate it further. And again, really fun to play around with. Okay, so that's a view of the converse mode. These gaps allow lane 2 to express strand 2, and strand 3 is maximum, just so we can hear it. But let's give it a more interesting pattern. Let's fill. Okay, interesting, fun stuff going on. Now I can transpose just one of these strands here. While also listening. Let's disable that. So the top and bottom strands are left on their default settings. And, you know, we can map an LFO to one of these as well. It gets really crazy really quick. But I kind of like this pattern, you know, and let's go ahead and hear what it sounds like double time or way accelerated. That's a little crazy. Okay, let's look at some other use cases here. So I'll go to these drums. I think it's about time we get some drums going on here. And I want to flip it to drums mode. And let's focus on one of these at a time. And yeah, let's try to do a little Euclidean pattern. Okay, great. I think we want to maybe reduce the chance of all of them, except for maybe okay, really interesting pattern. We could also, of course, just gate everything out except for our four to the floor, and this isn't the most exciting example, but yeah, let's go back to the choice, and let's say there's a chance that this next one will sometimes be a snare. Okay, we need to apply some Euclidean gating to our choice between the closed at the bottom and open hat here, right? How easy was that? How easy was that? Maybe we want to put a more interesting velocity pattern. So that's great. I like the pattern, but I want to narrow the range so it's not going as low or as high. And maybe let's give it an irregular cycle so it doesn't always repeat the same way. And then let's go and see what we have up here. Okay, again, maybe a little 12-step cycle on the velocity of that maraca. Now, I don't know what's going on with the other note choice on this drum rack, so let's just adjust here. And this is where it's a good example to, like, I don't know the note key, so let's go ahead and learn that into the claves. And because the operator was still armed for MIDI, it received that transposition on that middle strand. So important to remember to turn that off. Okay, so now we've got this probabilistic choice between the shaker and the clave. I want it to be more likely to be the shaker. And yeah, that's kind of working. Let's just go ahead to disable the kick beats so that it's not gonna overlap those for some reason. And last thing I want to do is just reduce the chance of all of those a little bit, the maracas and the shakers. Okay, yeah, that's something. All right, now we can transpose all of our operator pattern at once, but let's look at some other options we can do here. So I think I'm just going to pause this one. Let's go ahead and grab a different instrument. Let's grab drift, perhaps. All right, it's time to explore some more advanced configuration. So I've gone ahead, I've added a new instance of Trifecta to a new track with an instance of drift. And I've got a little pattern going there already. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of that too much, but we're in Converse mode. So these on strand 3 only play when those on strand 2 and strand 1 are not playing, and strand 2 is only allowed when strand 1 is not coming through. Okay, and now I can assign this for transposition with a learning input, but I want to express these different strands through some different instruments. I want to use this Euclidean polyrhythmic sequencer multi-timbrally. So what does that mean? Well, I've got an instance of collision here set to Marimba Classic with the included X relay utility, and I've got it set to relay 1 as the source. And I've also gone to operator. I've deactivated the trifecta there, add another X relay, and set that to relay source 2. So now if I go back to the trifecta, I want these high notes not to go to the track output, but to the Marimba Classic. And now it's being received over here. Isn't that nice? Okay, and let's send these lower bass notes, let's send those to the operator. And I might want to drop them down an octave, which I could do internally here or at the receiving end via X relays. Octave transposition. And I could similarly transpose those marimbas up on the X relay side, but I want to explore just recording in a pattern that we can use to transpose dynamically. So yeah, I'm gonna go and enable this for Learn 1, and I'm going to enable recording here. Didn't like that last note, but I'll fix it later. Okay, let's pretend that we're happy with that. And because these notes that I've recorded in via my push are only setting the transposition value of that note, it doesn't matter when they're playing because these are not being rhythmically expressed. However, if I wanted to use them in gate mode or something, I might want to play around with doing that a little differently. Okay, so we can also dynamically transpose the bottom note choice of strand 1 using, for example, an LFO. So I'll go ahead and grab LFO X Pro here, and I'm going to go ahead and draw an LFO shape. And yeah, that looks workable. Maybe a little faster. And I'm going to go ahead and map that to this. And I noticed that we're not really hearing those lower ones at all. So let's just okay, now that's a little too much modulation amount, and I think I'll want to set the floor value of those up a bit higher. So we've got strand 1, layer 1, note choice 1 being controlled by MIDI, and note choice 2 controlled by this LFO. That's kind of interesting. And we could get way deeper into the LFO settings, of course, but we have other videos on such things. Okay, so now I'm going to explore the other weave modes here, which we haven't really gotten into. So let's go into the count mode. And I think I want this drift pattern to be a little busier because right now we're not concerned with the overlapping of count modes and whatnot. So I'll just go ahead bring all those to a full gate setting and then just reduce their chances a bit. So now we're counting, and you can see the highlight color of which strand is currently playing selected as we count back and forth at a division of 4. So if I set this to 2, now it's every half bar going through them, and you can explore any odd interval to count between, because I don't like to discriminate between what some people might consider musically useful rhythmic values. And now we get this dynamic interplay between these different instruments getting triggered throughout the set. How about that? I'm enjoying it. Can't lie. Now, let's try doing the same thing but randomly in the chaos mode. And if I mute one of these strands, it automatically factors that into the randomization. So it's not going to randomize or count accidentally a deactivated strand. Now let's set this back to this division of 3. It can be kind of regular. Some of the notes might get truncated a little oddly, but they'll fundamentally stay in sync with whatever their clock settings are. Let's go back to a 4. So that's a quarter note randomization. And let's toggle to the random rest option. So now with this activated, you see there's a chance every quarter note that they'll actually stop playing back. Okay, and this is still transposing those 2 strand 1 notes by these variations. Okay, so to look at the last few options here, I would need to disable this clip, and I think I'll set these back to Converse mode. Okay, and I think to allow those bass notes through more often, I'm going to just reduce the chance of the top 2 lanes a little better. And just so this note is changing a little more, I think I'll go ahead and map the modulator to that in the opposite direction. And we can't map it because it's in learn mode, so I have to exit learn mode first, and there we go. So those are both controlled by the same LFO, but in divergent directions. They're in Converse mode, so they're interacting dynamically. And I want to just use this opportunity to explore the other input mode. So I have to make sure this is armed for MIDI input. And if I set it to gate mode, we're gonna stop hearing anything, because now all 3 strand outputs will only play when I play a note on my MIDI keyboard. Now transposition is turned off, so the holding of the note is only allowing them through. It's not manipulating them in any other way. It's not resetting the clock. It's just gating them through. Now we can also experiment with the side mode, which allows them all to play and then stops when I hold the note down, just to create different inverse dynamic behaviors that are fun to play around with. But finally, as the icing on the cake, I want to show you the ARP mode. So I'm going to arpeggiate these 3 strands that are being sent to 3 different instruments. And so they're all going to transpose and only play when I hold the note, and reset with each played note, and do so while remaining in sync with the clock. So let's explore. So here's ARP mode. Now, because it's probabilistic, we're not getting an identical ARP pattern every time, but as I trigger different notes, okay, so I'm going to maybe just capture that, and there we go. And while it's playing that sequence of notes that I captured, I think I will reset all the chances and try to do this with a little more repetitive and predictable gate pattern. So we can hear these, and I'll go ahead and quantize. So we've got a multi-timbral, multi-instrumental arpeggiation sequence going on here, and I'll just add a couple more notes in to make it a more typical pattern length. And I'll duplicate the clip so we can revert to that previous version. And let's just shorten all of these. Okay, missing one there, that's fine. Oh, it's just a little late. And I think maybe at the turnaround at the end there, we'll go and hold those down. Okay, I'm getting a little lost in the creative possibilities here, as I hope all of you will too. This has been a very deep dive into a surprisingly deep and powerful new tool, a Euclidean, polyrhythmic, polymetric, multi-parameter, multi-timbral sequencer, arpeggiator, generative, creative tool that I hope you're going to have a lot of fun with. For more information on Trifecta and all our devices, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and visit our website, manifest.audio, to purchase Trifecta and explore our full range of dynamic Max for Live and Live Rack devices.